day of Moshe's life. And this week's parsha is really a little bit different than most parshas in the sense that it's really it's a song. It's very poetic, and the song is really you could say it's prophecy, or it's Moshe's telling of what's going to happen in the future. Some of the commentaries, like Nachmanides, say that in a sense you could really find every event in Jewish history could be alluded to in this week's parsha. And it's very poetic, and a lot of it is repetition of ideas that Moshe has said earlier in this book. But if Moshe is saying it again, then obviously there's a different, I guess there's a different emphasis and a different focus, and that's what we're going to try to track. So we begin, as we usually do, with the parsha in a nutshell from Chabad.org. So you could either listen, or you can follow along if you have the email. Otherwise, you can listen, whichever works best. So I'm just going to read it from the Chabad.org. The greater part of the Torah reading of the Haazinu, the word Haazinu means listen in, consists of a 70-line song delivered by Moses to the people of Israel on the last day of his earthly life. Calling heaven and earth as witnesses, Moses exhorts the people, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will recount it to you, your elders, and they will tell you how God found them in the desert land, made them a people, chose them as his own, and bequeathed them a bountiful land. The song also warns against the pitfalls of plenty, and he quotes the verse, Yeshurun grew fat and kicked, you have grown fat, thick, and rotund. He forsook God who made him, and spurned the rock of his salvation. And the terrible calamities that would result, which Moses describes as God hiding his face. Yet in the end, he promises God will avenge the blood of his servants and be reconciled with his people and the land. So that's the summary of the song. And then we have the last few verses of the parsha. The parsha concludes with God's instruction to Moses to ascend the summit of Mount Nebo, from which he will behold the promised land before dying on the mountain. For you shall see the land opposite you, but you shall not go there into the land which I give to the children of Israel. So once again, we read how Moshe was not allowed to enter the land, but he was able to actually see the land, and from the peak of Mount Nebo, which is what we read in this week's parsha. So that's the song. That's the story in short. That's the story in a nutshell. There's a lot to talk about because we want to talk about the specifics of the song and some of the poetry and some of the things that Moshe is saying. But there's also some of the big picture ideas which we're going to get to. I also, if possible, maybe we'll try to read some of the verses inside because it is very poetic, so it's nice. But at first, we want to try to think about what exactly is the song, and we want really to think about I think we'll mention the various parts of the song, so we don't have to read the entire song inside, but we can get to the various parts of the song. And again, the song, as I alluded to earlier, the song is not really themes that are completely new to the. I'm not sure if someone's okay. The song is not themes that are completely new to the reader to the book of Deuteronomy, because a lot of this is what Moshe said before. And what's really happening here is Moshe's chief concern is not so much that the Jewish people are going to fail and not be successful in conquering the land. Moshe's greater concern is that they will be successful in conquering the land. They will grow successful. They will thrive. Yet, as he said many times earlier in this book, that the fear of success is that the people will ultimately forget about God and stray and serve idols. And in some sense, that is exactly what happened. And Moshe here is telling the people that, giving them the song, testifying and sort of warning them that this is what's going to happen. why does Moshe do so? And why does Moshe do so in the form of a song? So it's interesting. If you look at the end of last week's parsha, actually God tells Moshe to do so. So I'm going to read a verse or two in last week's parsha. So if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 21, actually it mentions it a few times. If you go back in verse 19, so chapter 31, verse 19, for example, and now write for yourselves this song and teach it to the children of Israel, place it in their mouths, in order that this song will be for me a witness against the children of Israel. Against doesn't mean against. Against means opposite. In other words, across. In other words, this is testifying against to the Jewish people. And I'm going to skip a verse, go to verse 21. If you want to, chapter 31, verse 21, should many evils and troubles happen to them, this song shall serve as a testimony before them as a witness, for it shall never be forgotten from the lips of their progeny, etc., etc. In other words, God is telling Moshe, you have to write the song, you have to teach it to their children, and this will always be a testimony to the Jewish people. And when these events, unfortunately, would unfold, they would know that why it's happening and know that it's really the divine plan. So just to add a little bit more details from last parsha to this parsha, what's the big concern here? The big concern here is that the Jewish people, when they will go to exile, and unfortunately we've been in exile for a pretty long time now. We've been in exile for over 1900 years. The first exile from Israel after the destruction of the first temple was only 70 years. Now we've been in exile for a long time. And so the number one fear of exile is that we would interpret the exile as God abandoning the Jewish people. That's the fear. So what Moshe is doing and what Hashem tells Moshe to do is to explain to the people that it's not God abandoning the people, it's God hiding his face. That's the verses we used. That's the verses that Moshe used in last week's parsha. He's hiding his face. And there's a big difference between abandoning and hiding his face. Why? Because abandoning is that God is not concerned for what happens with the Jewish people. Hiding his face is that God is concerned, God is present, but not in an obvious way. And that term, hiding his face, appears both last week's parsha, but also in this week's parsha in the song again. It says, God says, I will hide my face and see what becomes. So the idea of hiding of the face is very important, because this is how we're supposed to interpret the fact that sometimes we look around and we do not recognize God's presence. And again, as introduction for this week, I'm going back to last week. And I'm just going to read a verse or two from last week. If you go to chapter 31, you can listen, you don't have to go. But chapter 31, verse 17. So God says, and I will wax angry at them on that day, and I will forsake them. And I shall conceal my face from them, and they will be for consuming. And many evils and troubles will happen to them. And they will say on that day, look, because my God is not within me, did these evils happen to me. In other words, God says he's hiding his face. God says bad things are going to happen to the Jewish people. Now, what's the response of the Jewish people? So the response of the Jewish people, and they will say on that day, look, because my God is not within me. In other words, the Jewish people, their response would be, God has abandoned us. God is no longer with us. But then the next verse, God says, no, that's not what's happening. What's really happening? Verse 18, chapter 31, verse 18, V'anochi, and I will surely conceal my face on that day because of all the wickedness that they did, because they turned to other gods. What is God saying? God is saying, I did not abandon them, I'm just hiding my face. And then verse 19, which we read earlier, and now write for yourself this song and teach it to the children of Israel to place it in their mouths. So what's the ultimate purpose of the song? To tell the people that when you look around and you feel God abandoned you, you should know it's not God abandoning. God is present. God is hiding his face. And all this has been set out from God earlier as a result of, unfortunately, our negative actions. But again, the key here is to explain to us that this is not abandonment, this is concealment. And there's a tremendous difference between the two. Okay, that's introduction based on what last week, what Moshe himself sets up this song to be. And now we'll talk about the song itself. We'll talk about some of the big themes of the song, and then maybe we'll talk about some of the specific verses and some of the specific ideas. Okay.
Rabbi, a question?
Yes.
With respect to Hashem hiding his face, I believe we're of the opinion that in this current era, Hashem is still hiding his face. I believe that's true. However, on a personal basis, if through prayer or through what other means, I personally feel that I have had a message from Hashem. I think that perhaps is valid. So is he only hiding his face from the collective and not from an individual?
That's a good point. So what does it mean? I'm just shifting around this screen here. That's a very good point. So the question is, what does it mean that God's hiding his face? Are we talking about collectively for the Jewish people, or are we talking about individually for every individual person? So I think they're both true. In other words, there are times in a person's life that they feel that God is guiding their steps, and God is helping them and blessing them with what they need or with what they wish, and they feel like they're benefits of God's presence in their life. And there are other times, typically when people are suffering, and it's very possible to feel that abandoned by God. And so it's true on an individual basis. An individual person on an individual day or in an individual part of their life could feel that God is either present or God is concealed. And collectively, it's the same story. Collectively, well, we believe that certainly spiritually, God's hiding his face. The time of exile is a time of divine concealment. In other words, when we say we're in exile and we say next year in Jerusalem, why are we saying next year in Jerusalem? Oh, I know why, because of Corona. But before Corona, you want to be in Jerusalem, get onto a plane and go to Jerusalem. What are you praying next year in Jerusalem? So the answer is that Jerusalem is not only a place. Jerusalem is a state of being. Jerusalem is a state of awareness. The word Yerushalayim is Yirah Shalem, complete awe. In biblical times, when we went to the temple was a place where you experience the divine presence. You feel close to God. And today, that awareness that was available in the time of the temple is no longer available. Of course, Jerusalem is a very inspiring place. They also have good hotels with good breakfast and good bagels. I know a good bagel place in the old city. But in addition, and it's also very inspiring. There are a lot of yeshivas and places to pray. And the Western Wall is certainly inspiring. But in comparison to the awareness that was available in the times of the temple, we are in spiritual darkness. However, the key to remember here is, and what Moshe is trying to reiterate, I think Moshe's main point, and based on what God says, is that it's not abandonment, it's God's concealment. And the Baal Shem Tov always elaborated upon this theme, that concealment does not mean he's not present. To the contrary, when God conceals himself, then his essence is available. Sorry for going back to last week, but I keep doing that because to understand the song, you have to go to the setup of the song, which usually I have to set up the song for you. But the good news is here, God himself sets up the song. So you don't need me. I'm just telling you what the verses say. But the Torah itself sets up and sort of frames what the song is supposed to do. So if you turn back to the verses I read earlier, chapter 31, verse 18, the verse says, Va'anochi, and I will surely conceal my face on that day. Now, we mentioned before that there are different ways of saying I in Hebrew. The more common one is ani. Anochi is more formal, but it's also my essence. That's why the 10 Commandments begins with the word Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the Lord your God. And I is deeper than a name. A name is an expression, but the I is my essence. So the way the Baal Shem Tov explained this verse is When God conceals his face, that's where you see his essence. When God reveals his presence, you don't see his essence, you see his light. But the essence is available specifically in the time of exile. And if you want a simple example, it's not simple, but I guess I'll try to give this example. I'm not sure it's perfect. But let's say you are expressing love to somebody, you're expressing love to a child, and you give them a toy, whatever the toy is. Like you said, the difference between young children and adults, the only difference is how expensive the toys are. Child is young, you can get away with a cheaper toy. Child is older, oh my God, the price of toys goes up. But the point here is, so you express love, you give them something. Okay, that something is wonderful, but it's not your essence. When you have to hold back from giving, and you have to hold back and not give, or call that discipline, or call that concealment, you have to allow your child to make their own mistakes, and you have to allow your child to learn on their own, okay? Here, if the child looks superficially, he says, my parents don't care about me. But if the child looks deeper, the child says, you know something? That's the essence of the parental love. Because when you give the child a gift, the child is distracted by the gift. He says, oh, my parents loves me so much. How much? Well, depending on what the price tag of this gift was, right? Your mother loves you more than my mother loves me because she gave you a bigger birthday gift, right? So the expression conceals about the essential love. But if there's no expression of love, and then you manage to look deeper and say, why is this happening? Because my parent loves me, therefore my parent holds back, because now I have to learn on my own. Now I have to make my own decisions, or learn to mature. Then there's no distraction from the revelation, and you could feel the essential love. So this is a very powerful teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Not only is the time of exile a time where God is present, but the time of exile is a time that God's essence is present. And when you're in the time of the temple, however, when you feel inspired, you don't always get to the essence. It's very beautiful, it's very inspirational, but you don't always have the essence. So that's a very deep Hasidic idea where everything is flipped on its head, because the exile is not only a place where you could also believe in the presence of God, but you can actually get to the essence of God. So this is profound.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Isn't that why Hashem tells Moses to compose a song? Because the nature of poetry is such as in some ways it conceals more because there is some ambiguity, but on the other hand it reveals more for each individual because each individual understands it differently.
Yes. Most of the Torah is not poetry, it's prose, right? If you want to say law, if you want to tell somebody what to do, you can't be poetic. You have to be clear. And the Torah is a lesson, and the Torah is clear. There's a few places in the Torah where the Torah expresses itself in poetry, typically when the Jewish people are singing to God. This is probably the only time where God conveys his words in the form of poetry. And one of the reasons perhaps is that, as Vicky says, when things are poetic, it could have many more meanings. And because we're talking about the future, and the future is not necessarily set in stone perfectly, so there's multiple meanings of what this song means, and every person really in some sense could interpret it on their own. So in that sense, the fact that it's poetic means there's multiple layers of meaning. Another point is that poetry, God wants this, God says, teach it to the Jewish people, sima b'fihem, place it in their mouth. And we know from other cultures as well that before writing was prevalent, people would sort of review and memorize songs by heart or poems by heart. It's much easier to remember a poem than it is to remember prose. And maybe also that's why this is a song, because it's supposed to be something that every Jewish person is supposed to know because of how important the theme is. And again, the most important theme is that God did not abandon us. And I'll tell you one thing. I'll tell you the reason why we're all sitting here as Jews today is because in our history, our ancestors faced tremendous pressure to move away from their Judaism. And the best argument that people made, either sometimes they made it with kindness and sometimes they made it with force. But the best argument was that God has abandoned us. And how do we know? Because we've been exiled from the land of Israel and we're subject to persecution for so many thousands of years, for 2,000 years almost. And this is the proof that God has abandoned us. So therefore, we should update our religion and join other religions, either Christianity or Islam, but they all virtually are saying the same thing. They're saying that we used to be the chosen people, we're no longer the chosen people. And if we're sitting here today, it's because many people in our ancestral line have rejected that argument. And why have they rejected that argument? Because they rejected the fact that God has abandoned us. Why? Or how is this so in our psyche that despite all of the persecution, God is present and God is with us and God does not abandon us? Well, who told that to us? God himself through Moshe in this song. So that's why you cannot underestimate the power, you cannot overestimate the power of this song on the psyche of the collective Jewish people that allowed us to survive till this day in the 21st century. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the 6 sections of the song as codified by the Abarbanel. Because it's not clear. Since it's poetry, it's not clear exactly where one part ends and the other one starts. But I'm going to just put it out there what Abarbanel says. And if we have chance, maybe we'll try to track it. We'll see what happens. So Abarbanel says there are 6 sections in the song. Section number 1, we discuss the introduction. In other words, Moshe starts with the introduction. Poetically, he says, listen, heavens and earth, sort of he sets up the song, the introduction. Then we talk about the history of God's kindness to us. Beautiful verses. And then it talks about the sins. Once we go into Israel, there are sins. And sins is, so that's what we have. Introduction number 1, the kindness is 2, the sins is 3. After the sins is the punishment. And then that's 4. And then you get to 5, which is worse than the punishment, is there are very, 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 what's the word I'm looking for? Very difficult verses in this song where God says, I had a thought to destroy the Jewish people. And that's the 6th time, for the fifth section. And God says, why should I not destroy the Jewish people? Interesting, but it's a good idea. What's the argument not to destroy the Jewish people? Because they're so good, because they're so hot? No. The argument is because then the people of the world, in other words, the rest of civilization, the rest of humanity will not attribute the destruction of the Jews to God. They're not going to say they were destroyed because they abandoned God. They would say that the Jews have been destroyed because the people because of the power of the persecutors. In other words, they're not going to get the divine message. And therefore, God says, I'm not going to destroy the Jews. This is very difficult verses. We're going to discuss it in a minute, hopefully. And finally, that's section 5. And finally, section 6 is the section of the comfort where God says he will avenge the blood of his servants, in other words, all the persecution, and atone and chiper and atone for his nation and his land, and that implies bringing us back to our land. And that's the end of the song, the section of the comfort. So there's some very different. The song starts very poetically, very beautifully. God's kindness to the Jewish people. The song unfolds to talk about the sins, the punishment. God starts to destroy the people, and then finally it ends on a happy note, which is the future, which is where history is working toward to comfort the Jewish people and the land of Israel. In other words, God would ultimately the ending is a happy ending. So that's the song. I want to make 2 points. I want to make two general points, then we'll see if we have more. Oh, we have plenty of time. Okay. One interesting point is as follows: that the theme that the Jewish people are going to sin, and then they'll be exiled. That theme appeared in the Torah multiple times already, at least twice at length. In the end of the 3rd book, and a few weeks ago toward the end of the 5th book. And what's the theme? The theme is that the Jewish people are going to sin, and if they sin, they will be exiled, and the exile is going to come along with tremendous, terrible persecution, and then God will bring us back to the land of Israel. So the theme of the cycle of success, sin, punishment and persecution, and then coming back to Israel, that cycle has already been stated in the Torah twice, at least twice. So the question is, so what's news about this song? Is it Moshe just reiterating the same thing and just doing it in a more poetic way? Or is this song something completely different? So many people believe that this song is completely different. And the key factor that why this song is different, it's absolutely unbelievable, is what is the motivation or what is the requirement for the Jewish people to come back to Israel? Or for God to comfort the Jewish people. In other words, for God to save the Jewish people from the persecution. So if you look back 2 portions ago, after we discussed the terrible exile, then God says as follows. I'm looking back to where the song is chapter 30, 32. The setup to the song is 31. I'm going back to chapter 30, which is the conclusion of the previous story where God says that there's going to be, people are going to sin, there's going to be rebuke, and rebuke, punishment, the curses, and then we'll come back to Israel. So I'm going to read from there, last time where God says we'll come back to Israel. So here are the verses. It will happen when it happens that there come upon you all these statements, the blessings and the curse that I have set before you, and you will restore to your perception amid all the nations where Hashem your God has exiled you. In other words, you'll take it to heart. You're going to take the message to heart. And then verse 2, you will return to Hashem your God and obey him exactly as I am commanding you today, and you and your sons wholeheartedly and with your whole being. In other words, we're in exile. We take the message of exile to heart. We realize that the punishment has been because we abandoned God. We take the message to heart, and what do we do in verse 2? We return to God. We do teshuvah. We return to God. That's verse 2. Verse 3, after we return to God, the verse continues, Hashem your God will bring back your returnees and will be merciful toward you, and he will return and gather you from all the peoples that Hashem your God has dispersed you there. So there's one model. What's the model? The model is that we return to God, and because we return to God, Hashem brings us back to Israel. Wonderful. What is the requirement for redemption up till this point in the Torah? The requirement is teshuvah. The requirement is return to God. And that happened in the third book. That happened in the fifth book as well. Okay, that's up to this point. Now you read the song. Nachmanides pointed this out almost 800 years ago. Nachmanides points this out. He says, ladies and gentlemen, this song lacks the concept of teshuvah. You do not have to return for God to bring us back to Israel. There's no mention of teshuvah. There's no mention of repentance. So this is a big deal. Why is there no mention of repentance? And the answer is because maybe that's the whole purpose of the song. Maybe this is what this song is adding to what we already knew earlier from Moshe. And Moshe introduces this concept on the last day of his life. The connection between God and the Jewish people is unconditional, to the extent that even after we're exiled because we abandoned the covenant and we don't listen to God, we didn't listen to God, we strayed after the idols, God will then bring us back to Israel. God will comfort us. God will heal us, not because of anything we do, not because we do teshuvah, not because we return to God. Why does he do so? So the stated reason is because what are the Gentiles going to say? What does that really mean? What that means is that the presence of the Jewish people in the world already, just their presence serves a purpose for announcing the presence of God in this world. So even if we don't do anything, just our presence is already enough to bring God's message to the world. People hear about the Jews, they know about the Jews. Those who love us and hate us, both love us and hate us for the same reason, because we represent God's chosen people. We are God's chosen people. And just our presence in the world, regardless of what we do, is already fulfilling, reminding humanity of their purpose. So there's a purpose for the Jewish people's existence, even regardless of what we do, even if we don't do teshuvah. That's one motivation. Another motivation is that this song keeps referring to the Jewish people as his children and sons and daughters. Even when the verse describes the sins, it describes the Jewish people sinning as the sins of his sons and daughters. which means that we're talking here about an essential bond. It's not a bond, it's not a covenant that's based on, well, if we earn it, God will bring us back to Israel. That's one model. The model is if we do teshuvah, God brings us back. But the song here introduces a much deeper concept. The deeper concept is the unconditional bond between God and the Jewish people, and therefore God brings us back to Israel and comforts us even without mention of teshuvah. Why? Because the bond is unconditional. So that's one big idea of the song. What did this song add to the previous times where Moshe talks about the future and talks about the cycle of coming into Israel, sinning and being exiled, and hopefully in the future be returning to Israel? The model that is introduced here is that the big idea here, the chidush, the novelty in this rendition and the rendition of the song is that we're talking about returning to God, returning to Israel, and God comforting us even when there is no teshuvah, even when there's no repentance, because the bond between God and the Jewish people is unconditional. So that's one big idea. If anybody has any comments or questions, good. Otherwise, we move on to a lot more to say, trust me.
So, Rabbi, does this mean that on a certain level we should disregard the concept of teshuvah?
No, I don't think it means that. I think it means that our relation, in other words, the best example is the example that Moshe uses, example of children. Your children, you hope they live up to your expectations. You hope that they will actually earn the kindness you bestow upon them, right? You hope they live up to their potential and they live up to their purpose. And that's the better model in some sense, right? However, having said that, that doesn't mean that if they don't, that doesn't mean you're going to abandon them. In other words, there is an essential bond. There is something beautiful about actually the love to children when they don't listen, because then you actually tap into that. If you think about it for a second, I love my child. Why do I love my child? Because my child got a 98 on the test. Okay, fine, right? So that makes me proud. Fine, that's a beautiful thing. But what happens if my child didn't take the test or failed the test? And then I have to dig deeper and I have to love the child anyway, right? So what's a deeper love, right? So if you think about it, they're both true. On one hand, I want my child to earn the love. On the other hand, if the love is unconditional, then that expresses a deeper part within myself. So both are true. Both are true. You want your child to live up to earn the kindness, and that's true. But if they don't, there's another model, and that model is the model of unconditional love, which in some ways is more profound. I'm not saying it's the preferred way, but in some ways it's more profound.
Rabbi, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So in the concept of, unconditional love and dealing with your children and the tests where the children fail, where does the analogy work with the hiding of your face? I've never hidden my face from my children, ever.
That's good. You didn't have to. Sometimes a person has to tell their children, sometimes if you show them love, you're enabling the bad behavior. So sometimes you're lucky you didn't have to do it, but sometimes you have to say, either literally or figuratively, get out of my house, right? I'm not saying at age 6, but sometimes at whatever age it is, sometimes you have to say, I'm sorry, I don't love this behavior. I don't love the way you're acting. I'm not showing you any love. So when I say I'm hiding my face in the Torah is my will. In other words, what's the difference? The Medrash has a beautiful analogy. The difference between, sometimes you have to give something to your enemy for whatever reason. I don't know, you have to pay, whatever it is. So the Medrash has an analogy where you turn your back to the person and you throw it behind your back. You don't want to face them when you give it to them because your face represents your will. When I want something, I look at you. If I have to give you something and I don't like you, I'm not going to look at you. So when I say I hide my face, what God is saying, I hide my will. I'm not showing, face can be multiple things. It could mean God's providence, but in this context, it could also mean God is not showing that he loves us. So hiding your face from your children would mean you're not showing them love. And sometimes that's the greatest sign of love is that when you don't show the love. In other words, that's a deeper love. And it's easy to show love, but it's hard to hide your face, especially when you want to show your face. But the face in that sense is the expression of love. Okay, so I think we should read a little of the poetry, enough introductions. Well, not enough introductions, but we should read a little poetry anyway, and then we'll see what happens. So I think we'll start from the beginning. I'll give you right now what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get to verse 10. So I'm going to read quickly to verse 10 from chapter 32, verse 1. It's very poetic. Everything here is poetic and everything here has meaning. So I'm going to try to, again, not get stuck on the meaning of the verses until verse 10 because I want to get to verse 10. But I'm giving a warning right now. I'm not guaranteeing not to get stuck before verse 10. I hope not to, but I may. If it's anything that pops out in your head, if it sounds interesting and you want to elaborate, please let me know. Here we go. Moshe speaks. I'm reading one translation. You may have a different translation. It's fine. Either way. I hearken, O heavens, and as I declare, let the earth hear my mouth saying. So Moshe speaking to the heavens and to the earth. Let my instruction flow like rainfall. Let my saying drip like dew. Like storm winds on verdure and like raindrops on grass. So it's the metaphor of Moshe speaking is like the rain and the dew giving life to the grass, to the verbiage. When I pronounce Hashem's name, give greatness to our Lord. The Almighty's works are flawless. All his ways are just. A God of faithfulness without injustice. He is righteous and upright. This is a very interesting verse. Hatzur tamim pa'alo. It's a declaration of faith. God is complete. Whatever he does is just. We don't always see the justice. Especially if you read the song, we talk about all the difficult challenges, all the difficult persecution. We don't always see God as just. But we believe that everything God does is just. In fact, this verse, verse 4, Hatzur Tamim Pa'alo, is actually said at a funeral. It's called a blessing called Sidu Kadin, which means we accept upon ourselves God's judgments. And the blessing begins with this verse, Hatzur Tamim Pa'alo. The Almighty's works are the rock, referring to God. The rock, his works are flawless. Tamim means complete. For all his ways are just. So that's interesting. That's the introduction. God is just. Verse 5, destructiveness does not affect him. It is his children's defect, a wrapped and twisted generation. Is it with Hashem that you deal this way? Base people lacking wisdom? Is he not your father who made you his? He made you and gave you a base. And now we're saying, let's go back to the history. Go back to history and think about the glove that God had to the Jewish people. Remember world history. Study the generational epochs. Ask your father and he will relate to you. Your elders and they will tell you. When the Exalted One bequeathed nations, when he set apart the sons of man, he established the boundaries of peoples according to the number of the children of Israel. Because of Hashem's portion, his people, Yaakov, the cable of his heritage. What is he saying here? He's saying basically there's many nations, and that God placed each one in their proper border. In other words, each nation gets their land. But what's Chelek Hashem? What's Hashem's portion? That's Jacob. Jacob is the cable of his heritage, the rope of his heritage. So that's a metaphor. We can talk about it if we have time. But the bottom line is we're saying there's humanity. And humanity was all set up in the right place. But the Jewish story is of a unique connection to God. Now, why does he evoke humanity? Just say, Jacob is God's portion. Why does he begin? When Hashem bequeathed nations, when he set apart the sons of man, he established the boundaries of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. The commentaries explain that in the ancient world there were 70 nations. And the 70 nations, why 70? So the 70 nations correspond to the 70 souls of the Jewish people that descend to Egypt. By the time Jacob goes down to Egypt, his family consists of 70 souls. So mystically speaking, what we're saying here is that the Jewish people are really, in some sense, a reflection of the rest of the world and of the rest of humanity. And the rest of humanity is a reflection of the Jewish people. So what's really happening here is is that we're saying the Jewish story is not separate and divorced from the rest of humanity. It's not like the rest of humanity have one mission and the Jewish people have a separate mission. The Jewish story emerges from the story of humanity. In other words, the purpose of the Jewish people is, amongst other things, to affect that their connection to God should actually affect and be a light to the rest of the people. And that's why when before he mentions that Jacob is the rope of his heritage, he says there's a context here. The context of the relationship of God and the Jewish people is the broader context, is how this is supposed to impact the rest of humanity. Okay, so now we're talking, so that's the history. And now we talk about, as we mentioned, we're talking about God's kindness to us. And God's kindness to us is supposed to be sort of a contrast. We say, because of God's kindness to us, and look how we repay the kindness. In other words, Moshe is setting up the kindness as sort of an indicator to we should have been loyal to God just like God was loyal to us. So we're going to read some beautiful verses, and then we're going to do some of the mystical meaning in verse 10. Verse 10, he found them in a wilderness country. Or literally, Yimtsa'eu, he found them in a desert land and in an arid, shrieking desolation. In other words, God found the Jewish people in the desert. Why does Moshe evoke the desert? Because the desert was the place where we needed the divine kindness to survive. He encircled them. He granted them understanding. He sheltered them like the pupil of his eye. In the desert, God sheltered us with the clouds of glory. It's very poetic in the Hebrew. It doesn't come over in the English in that sense, but he gave us wisdom. When did he give us wisdom? He gave us understanding. In the desert, he gave us the Torah. And then he continues, like an eagle who rouses his nests, fluttering over his young. He extends his wings, grasps them. He bears them on his wing. Hashem conducted them alone without opposition by alien gods. In other words, in the desert, just like the eagle protects its young, so too God carries us on his wings, and God carries us alone. We needed no other shelter other than God. And then we continue how God brought us into Israel, and ultimately how we reject God in return, unfortunately. Okay, what are some of the big questions here? The big questions here are that usually when we talk about the history, where should the history start? Well, the history starts the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Where does Genesis start? Jewish people. You want to say the story of the Jewish people? Mention the patriarchs and the patriarchs and the matriarchs. They are absent from this rendition of history. What else is absent from this reading of history? The Exodus of Egypt. God found the Jewish people in the desert. Really? How did he find them in the desert? How did they get to the desert? They got to the desert because God pulled us out of Egypt and put us in the desert. So this sort of telling of history as if God just shows up and finds them in the desert and had not known them before is strange, because that's not what happened. We know what happened. We know there were the patriarchs. We know there were matriarchs. We know that there was a history of people who discovered God. We know that the descendants got to Egypt, were enslaved in Egypt, and God had to pull them out of Egypt with great miracles. They didn't just show up in the desert. So what's the meaning of this verse? He starts the history. God found them in the desert. Right? That's very different than what we read in the first book and a half in the Torah. So there must be some deeper meaning, and the deeper meaning has to be connected to the overarching theme. So what does it mean? This is the Kabbalistic interpretation of this verse and the way Rashi explains the verse. And in other words, the Kabbalistic interpretation of Rashi as well. I'm going to read the Rashi. Rashi says as follows. I think Rashi is troubled by this question as well. What does it mean God found them in the desert? God doesn't just find them in the desert. God brings them to the desert with great miracles. In other words, it needed God's intervention. So God actually, if anything, he found them in Egypt. He didn't find them in the desert. So I'm going to read Rashi. Rashi has this problem that we have. So let's see how Rashi addresses the problem, and then we say how the Hasidic masters explain what Rashi is trying to say. Says Rashi, he found them in the wilderness country, or literally, he found them in the land of the desert. Then he found faithful to him in wilderness country as they obligated themselves to his Torah his sovereignty and the yoke of bondage, and his yoke of bondage, which Yishmael and Esav did not do, as it is said, he radiated from Seir to them, appeared from Mount Paran. We'll get to that in a second. An arid, shrinking desolation, an arid, desolate land, an area with the shriekings of the Taninim and the Benot Ya'ana. So in other words, there's wild animals there. There too they adhere to the faith and did not say to Moshe, how can we go into the wilderness, arid, desolate area? As it is said, when you followed me into the wilderness. What's Rashi saying? Rashi saying is as follows. When it says God found them in the desert, it doesn't mean that God was hovering around and maybe using Google Maps and then found Google Earth and then found people in the desert and said, you know what? Okay, I'll pick them because they're in the desert. That's not what the verse means. It cannot mean that because God did not find them in the desert. He found them in Egypt. So what does it mean he found them in the desert? It says Rashi, God found something unique in the Jewish people in the desert. In other words, in the desert, they displayed something that was unexpected. What was unexpected in the desert? The loyalty of the people to God. In what sense that were they loyal? So the first thing Rashi says is they accepted the Torah, which is something that the other nations did not want to do. But another thing Rashi says is the fact that they followed God into the desert is really a tremendous act of faith. Because if Moshe tells you, we're going to leave Israel, but we're going to stop in a place of civilization. Okay, how bad could that be? You always have the options. If it doesn't work out, at least you'll survive based on because you're in civilization. But Moshe says, we're leaving Egypt, we're going to the desert. To follow Moshe into the desert was a tremendous act of faith. In fact, Rashi quotes that verse. There's a beautiful verse from Jeremiah, and we actually say it in the Rosh Hashanah prayers, when we mention the verses of Zichronot, the verses of memory, a very poetic verse, probably one of the nicest verses in the Bible. What God says to the Jewish people as they're sinning, as Jeremiah is telling them that they're going to be exiled from the land, says Jeremiah, God says to the people, Kol Amar Hashem, so said the Lord, I remember to you the kindness of your youth, the love of your bridal days when you followed me into the desert, into a land that's not sowed. In other words, God says the loyalty that the Jewish people followed Moshe into the desert is something that made a tremendous impact on God. Even when God was angry at the people, that idea of the youthful love and the youthful trust, that is something that God evokes. In other words, what's really happening here? Why are we not mentioning the patriarchs? Why are we not mentioning Egypt? Why are we mentioning only the fact that the Jewish people in the desert found something? So let's talk about the term find. The Kabbalah explains that by definition, when you say find, you mean something that is unexpected, right? If you work and you get a paycheck at the end of the week or the end of the month, you can't say, I found my paycheck. You didn't find your paycheck, you earned your paycheck, right? You're walking down the street and you find something. The find is something that's unexpected. So when God says, I found them in the desert, what does that mean? It means that God found what was unexpected. What's unexpected? Unconditional love. If you think about any relationship, so the relationship starts as conditional love. Why am I in this relationship? Because I'm in this relationship because I love you. In simple English, that means what I get from you. And you're in this relationship because what you get from me. Hopefully it's win-win. I give you, you give me, we're both happy. But that's conditional. And that was in some sense the relationship between God and the patriarchs. God loved them. God promised them the land of Israel and promised them that the descendants were going to come to Israel. Why? Because it was a covenant, because they kept God's word. So God promised them to protect them. So it's a win-win situation. It's a good business deal. It's conditional in some sense. Then it comes to the Jewish people. And that's why we don't want to evoke that relationship, because that's not the purpose of the overarching purpose of this song. The overarching purpose of the song, as we mentioned, is that even if the people are undeserving, ultimately at the end of days, we're going to come back to Israel and God will show his love to us once again. So this song is really a song about the unconditional relationship. So if we're talking about the unconditional relationship, we don't want to talk about the patriarchs and matriarchs because the patriarchs and matriarchs, that relationship was conditional. What's the unconditional relationship? Is that we found and we displayed to God in the desert. In other words, when it was not logical to do something and we did it because of faith in God. That is what God finds as almost surprising. That's the find. The find is it's unexpected. And that evokes within God the unconditional love to us. It always existed. But when you have a relationship and one party in the relationship displays unconditional love, so that can awaken the unconditional love in the other party as well. If parents show it to children, children maybe in some cases, not always, mostly not, but some cases the children also feel that. But certainly when children show it to parents, then the parents feel that as well. So that's an interesting idea, because the overarching idea of the song is the unconditional love. That's why when we start talking about the relationship, we don't talk about the conditional, the logical aspects of the relationship. Well, we had people, great men, great women, patriarchs, matriarchs. They discovered God. God loved them. God promised them the land of Israel. None of that. Why? But what do? We evoke? We evoke the fact that the people, they expressed unconditional faith and love to God when they followed him into the desert. And every relationship is the same, because a healthy relationship certainly starts as conditional, but hopefully grows and matures and becomes unconditional. And that's a metaphor for our relationship with Hashem as well.
Rabbi, could I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
So that's beautiful what you just said about the desert, and I really like that. Can you connect that with what the Jewish people, what the Midrash is about the Jewish people in the time of Purim? It was only then that they began to observe Torah nationally?
So the idea is accepting God's Torah in the desert. So the fact that we accepted God's Torah in the desert, the Midrash says, the Talmud says, that was not true acceptance of the Torah, because when we accepted the Torah in the desert, it was almost like we had no choice, because God was taking care of us. God was displaying his love to us. And when someone is showering you with love and they say, do me a favor, accept my Torah, you're going to say yes. Where was it? Where was true acceptance? True acceptance was in the time of Purim. Time of Purim was the time of the decree of Haman. And by the way, the queen, of course, was Esther. The Talmud says that Esther comes that the verse that says when God says, "I will conceal my face," alludes to Esther, because the verse concealment in Hebrew is astir, I will conceal. And the verses we read earlier is God says, "Va'anochi haster astir panai bayamahu." Conceal, I will conceal my face in those days. In other words, where do you really accept the Torah? When God's presence is concealed, when there are decrees against the Jewish people, and yet we remain loyal to Judaism. That is where we're truly accepting the Torah. So I think you're right. I think it's a similar idea. That's where the unconditional bond comes into effect. But even before that, the first time we experience the unconditional bond is just the fact that we follow God into the desert. That's not logic. That's not a relationship based on logic, because it was not logical to go into the desert. In fact, many Jews didn't want to go to the desert, and many Jews stayed in Egypt. But the idea is that sometimes the conditional love develops and becomes unconditional love, and hopefully that happens in our relationships as well. So when you have relationships to children or parents, or in other words, these are biological relationships, that's unconditional. In other words, even if you don't always express it, you don't always feel it, but deep down the bond will always be there. But if you have a relationship to a spouse, for example, so it's supposed to be conditional. In other words, that's why you date. Why do you date? Because you want to make sure that both of you are gaining, or both of you are being enhanced by this relationship. So it's supposed to be conditional. But if it remains conditional, if you're married for 60 years and it's still only conditional, then it's not a marriage. What it is I guess it's a business deal. You do this for me, I do that for you, and it's a trade-off. So it's a financial, not financial, it's a transactional. It's not a relationship. In other words, we expect the relationship to take roots and to deepen and to transition from conditional to unconditional. And when that happens, sometimes it takes 2 decades till you realize that happens. But when that happens, you're surprised because you found it, because it's unexpected, because unconditional love is unexpected. I don't mean when you fall in love. Fall in love, it's not unconditional. It's very conditional. You love because of how it makes you feel or what you're getting from it. But the point here is that's the idea. God found us. What do you mean he found us? God knew us for a long time at that point. In fact, he chose us and brought us to and performed all those miracles and split the sea. Yeah, but then when there came a moment where there was a display of unconditional love, that was a find. That was surprising. And when we discover unconditional love within ourselves, we surprise ourselves, right? We surprise God, but we also surprise ourselves. And that's the key of the finding him. We found him in the desert land.
Rabbi,
So
isn't there also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Isn't there also midrash that when we were at Mount Sinai that God put Mount Sinai over our heads and he says, accept it or I'll drop the mountain on your head?
Yes, that's the Medrash, but I gave you the Hasidic rendition because the Hasidic rendition is that when God forced us to accept the Torah by this great mountain he put over our head, it doesn't mean literally, because why would God have to coerce us? So it means he coerced us with love. So the mountain is, in Kabbalah, always a mountain represents love because you're going upward. There's the plain, and then there's the mountain, and the mountain goes upward. So mountain represents going raising up to God. So when you say God forced us to accept the Torah because of the mountain, it means by showing love. When you shower love upon somebody, you're almost coercing them to do what you want, right? That's the way it is. Because you're giving them so much, it's very hard to resist the love. When you don't show the love and they do it anyway, that's when they're doing it because they realize it's the right thing to do, not because of not because of external coercion, even positive coercion. But positive coercion is also coercion. Coercion means it comes from the external factors. It doesn't come from your own internal acceptance or your internal realization. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the story in short. There's a lot more to say because we really just gave the introduction and the overview, and we did a few verses, 10 verses, and we talked about one word. He found him. We found one word to talk about of the whole song. So the good news is come back next year and we'll have more. God will give us long life and healthy life, and we'll be able to keep studying the Torah.
Rabbi, does this mean we're not having class tomorrow?
God willing, class tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We'll do a little of Kabbalah of Yom Kippur, and I hope also Kabbalah of Sukkot. I hope we'll find something that will thread together both Yom Kippur and Sukkot.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi, can I just ask you